Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Wednesday, July 1st, 2020 episode of Free Webinar Wednesdays. This is Eric Cook over here at WSI Digital, where we work with customers and helping them better engage and connect with their clients online. Hop out to poweredbywsi.com and learn more about all the cool stuff that we get to do here in our agency and the folks that we serve. With me, as you can likely see from the webcam, give a wave, Mr. Augenbaum. And the website, I've got my good friend, a former FBI special agent and just all around great guy, but I can't say really good ping pong player, Mr. Scott Augenbaum. See, I told you I'd work that ping pong in there. The backstory behind that is Scott actually was a guest speaker at one of WSI's global conventions and talking about what we're going to talk about today, which is cybersecurity and consumer awareness and just keeping yourself safe when you go online, as we all are doing. And as to kicking off the conference, we actually had a little ping pong tournament and everybody paired up with people. And of course, the organizers at WSI said, well, we'll of course put you with Scott because you invited him and he's the guest speaker. So you should really take care of this VIP. And the size of this man and the reach of his arms and just the pure physical talent that I'm sure he had just ingrained in his being did not come out at all on the ping pong table whatsoever. And we were quickly eliminated by, I don't remember who we played, but it wasn't pretty. And
it was two
he probably could have shot the ping. What's that?
It was two 70-year-old guys.
Yeah, probably. So he probably could have shot the ping pong ball out of the air with his handgun as an FBI agent, but he just couldn't seem to get that ball back over the net. So it didn't have it. So anyway, all that being said, Scott and I recently connected and had a chat and got to talking. And with some of the things that we've been talking about here on Free Webinar Wednesdays and COVID and staying in place and sheltering and doing more activity online, and a lot of people are going online for what might be one of their first times doing business and using things. I know a lot of our bankers are talking about customers that would never use their mobile app. They would never use their remote deposit, take a picture. They would never use online transfers, or now having to figure out how to do that because the offices are just simply closed. And so as more people go online and they might not be as familiar or as savvy or wary of the bad guys out there trying to take advantage of them, we thought it'd be a really good idea to bring Scott on and have a chat after we're done jibing each other. And I'm sure he's going to pay me back at least one or two times during his comments. 5, okay, good. But being able to then share some of what Scott does. He's written a book. He talks all over the world about the non-technical components of staying safe online and common sense and the importance of what's up here, of making sure that you stay safe, not necessarily software or what's on the computer. So Scott, I am super excited that you are with me. All jokes aside, I consider you a good friend, and it's certainly nice to have you part of the show. And I'm looking forward to exploring with you what you've seen going on in the world of cyber, some of the new things that are happening, and just best practices according to your years of experience, and particularly over the last couple of months. So, well, Eric, how's that?
That was
there.
Beautiful.
We go.
I got tears in my eyes.
Do I feel a hug coming on?
It does. Well, listen, it kind of brings me back to when I met you, and it was 2012, and we're at a bankers conference in Memphis, and all of a sudden I'm out there to do what I'm going to do, which is to tell people, look, if you're using social media, you're out of your mind and all that stuff. And here I am, I meet you, and I'm like, hey, let's just get a couple of things good. I'm not a good guy to go on afterwards. And we had a couple of talks about that. And it really worked in, and that kind of developed the friendship because, since then, we've shared a lot of information because I realized, I used to say in 2012, if you're on LinkedIn, you're out of your mind. And then I'm calling you yesterday going, hey, Eric, how do I do this? because it's how do you do it safely? And that's why, you brought me up and spoke to your folks. And you do such a great job of being open-minded about this on trying to take and wrap security into marketing, which a lot of folks aren't doing. And that's what differentiates you. But let's go back to that day in 2012. Cybercrime, it's not always about you, Eric. I'm telling a story here, okay?
I was going to say, he paid me a compliment. Now he's going to reverse and say something else.
No. So we got plenty of time to do that. But 2012, when we're talking about cybercrime, we're looking about then at we probably had, it was $1 trillion global problem. So that's 2010. That's 2012. I'm just trying to get myself back up over here. So the problem's $1 trillion problem. By 2021, it's predicted to be a $6 trillion problem. So let's think about this. An 8-year period of time, cybercrime is going to go from $1 trillion problem to a $6 trillion problem. And that's the predicted estimate from CyberSecurity Ventures. But that was before COVID-19. And what happened with COVID-19, where everyone's working from home, we're logging in remotely, we're relying so much on our cloud-based platforms. The Internet Crime Complaint Center says, this is the FBI's clearinghouse, that the reports of cybercrime are going up 400% since the time the pandemic started. And now we have all this civil unrest that's going on, and we have more people giving their opinions. And to me, it's a perfect recipe for an even greater disaster. You want me to keep talking? I can talk forever, Eric.
I want you to keep talking. Absolutely. You've got an hour, man. I'll interrupt you when I have a question. Don't you worry about that.
I mean, I don't need you to talk. I don't need you to talk here. No, but just think about it. I mean, just think about from what your clients are dealing with in the banking sector. What are they telling you? I mean, don't you see from where you sit, the technology, the digital marketing, the digital banking, aren't we seeing more and more of that going?
Well, a lot of banks have been on the sidelines, and we work mostly with smaller community banks that might not have, I hesitate to say technical expertise, because that doesn't really do justice, because there's a lot of small banks out there that have got some very competent people. But by and large, the smaller banks tend to be a lot more conservative, and a lot of them have shied away from things like online account opening or other sorts of automated product delivery or acquisition services because of the fear of fraud or of risk or of loss. And when their lobbies shut down, which is how they would open an account, that's how they would do a loan. When PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, and all the small businesses throughout the United States were scurrying to try to get involved in this SBA funding, they couldn't come into the office and fill out an application, because guess what? The office was closed. So now we had to figure out ways to not only deal with social distancing and making sure that shelter in place and ensuring that your lobbies were, secured, but now we had to figure out how we're going to take these millions and millions and millions of dollars that the government is allocating for small businesses to survive, and how to figure out how we can take an application, how we can get it securely executed and endorsed and signed and authorized, and secure documents delivered. And COVID is shaking up many things in the industry, but the acceptance and the acknowledgement of why digital needs to be part of your culture, and how you have to take the things that you talk about that you've seen for almost 20 years as a special agent in the FBI, and how do you acknowledge that and go, okay, there are boogeymen in the closet, but how do we make sure that we keep the door shut, or as shut as we can, and still do business? And in my opinion, the genie's out of the bottle, because the customer is now becoming accustomed to online conveniences, and they're not going to want to come back. I mean, they may start coming back to the lobby, but even banks that we've talked to that have accepted lobby traffic, you're seeing 10, 20, maybe 30% of the regular lobby traffic. But everybody that has been forced to embrace digital is now doing it, and now they're asking for more. So bankers are trying to struggle with, okay, how do we do all of this and stay safe and keep our customers secure? And we've got brand new people that are out there doing digital that had never done it before, that may not know the right things to look for, the things to pay attention to when it comes to keeping themselves safe online.
And listen, it's like the old bank robber Willie Sutton said when they arrested him in 1960s, they stuck a microphone in his face. They said, Willie, why did you rob the bank? He said, that's where the money is. Where is the money today? It's still at the bank, but it's how we access that. And that's really what I want to kind of focus on today and have this discussion with the audience, because listen, can go into stories. The problem is absolutely getting worse out there. But at the same time, we're spending more and more money to keep ourselves safe. So what does it mean when you spend more money and we try to keep out, and we spend more money and the problem gets worse? It means we're not doing things right. And I always wait for somebody to challenge me to say that we are doing it right. Because in my career, with every one of the victimizations that I dealt with, they all had 4 elements. And the first element is that whenever nobody ever expected to be a victim. I remember going to the Tennessee Bankers Association in 2008 at the Strategic Bank Technology Conference, and sitting there and asking that question to this audience, going, how many of you guys are concerned that you or your clients are going to be the victim of Russian organized crime? And everybody looked at me like I had 3 heads, and Lee, our friend Lee Wethington, said like this, hey, you're not supposed to say you guys, you're supposed to ask the question y'all. And maybe that's
y'all.
I didn't respond to it.
Nobody could understand you.
Yeah, but not one person.
It's that New York accent.
Not one person raised their hands. And then I told them at that point, the FBI considers Russian organized crime to be the #1 threat to the financial services sector. And not one person realized that. And then I said, whose responsibility is it to spread this message? That was my responsibility, because everyone said, hey, we're just a small bank in Middle Tennessee. Why would anyone want to target us? We're not in New York City. We're not in Washington, D.C. So why would anyone target us? And the one thing that I always say is the bad guys do not care who you are. They want access to your information and your client's information. And even though banks do a really good job of keeping their internal network safe, what about the education side of things? Just think about this. A bank tells their customers, don't click on a link. We're never going to ask you for your username, password, date of birth. We all know that, but this is phishing 2.0. The bad guys get into the end user's bank account and email account because they're not using 2-factor authentication. And from there, they log in, they see where the individual is banking. So they look at that email, they see that they're getting their statements from the First National Bank of Brighton Beach, which there is no bank. And all of a sudden, just think about this. If I get an email that looks like it's coming from my bank, addresses me by name, has the last 4 digits of my bank account number, and I get this email, Eric. Dear Mr. Augenbaum, we want to let you know that at 9 o'clock this morning, somebody attempted to log into your debit card from an ATM machine in Las Vegas. We're sending you this email because we realize that you are in Nashville, Tennessee. We're telling you this because we believe it's a fraud. What goes through the average person's mind when they get an email like that?
Sounds legitimate, because you know where I'm at, because I know you're in Nashville. And there's some validating information there because it's got your card number. And I'm sure in your scenario, they've done a good job of mirroring the bank's logo and
absolutely.
At least, yep.
Okay, so here's the next thing on the email. It says, however, we don't want to disrupt you. So if this is a legitimate transaction, don't do anything at all. and in 90 minutes, $1,800 is going out of your account. What goes through your mind now?
That's not legitimate, and I better hurry up and tell somebody because I don't want $1,800 to go to somebody in Las Vegas.
Okay.
Unless it's me.
Okay, absolutely. So here's the next line. If this is not a valid transaction, and this is what I call the Jedi mind trick, if this is not a valid transaction, all you need to do is call the 1-800 number in the email or click on the link. Now, what is the majority of the population going to do?
I would call the phone number, or I know I'm unusual in that regard. I would look at the phone number and compare it to the number. I would just call the bank directly and not use the number that's in the email.
Okay,
but
let's add a little bit more into this. You're going out on crazy bike rides, okay? One of your 100-mile bike rides in the middle of the winter, and you get this right before you're about to get out of the car. It never happens at a time when we think about it, but here's what happens.
True.
So let's say you go like this. I'm not going to click on the links. You call the 1-800 number in the email for convenience, and you get the only perfect English speaker in Latvia who said, and you go, hey, this is Mr. Cook, I want to let you know. And the person on the other side who has a perfect Boston accent in Latvia says to you, all you need to do is click on the link. You click on the link, there's no malware, you enter in username and password, and right now the bad guys are able to get access to username and password, and they're able to log in. Well, however, the banks do a really good job at IP blocking, so the bad guy who's over in Latvia can't log in, so they compromise a computer in the United States. The bank's network picks it up. Banks are doing a good job geolocating. They're using cookies, so it sends a bunch of challenge questions. And how much information on challenge questions can we find online? Almost all of it. And now the bad guys log in, and they're able to do an electronic check out of the account, and then they go over to the bank and they say to the bank, how did you let this happen to me?
Right.
And you know what? And as far as Regulation E is concerned, the consumers get reimbursed in whole, and the banks eat the losses on that. Unless it's
I think that's an important thing to mention, because I understand Reg E, you understand Reg E, the bankers that are on this call understand Reg E, but from a consumer's perspective, I've had a lot of people that have said, well, banks have insurance for that. That just takes care of it. It's no big deal. And while you can certainly get cybersecurity insurance, that is very difficult to collect on, because there's a lot of things that you have to do in order to ensure that you're abiding by the terms of the insurance policy from the ones that I've read. And I think it's important to note that this is not some magic fund that like you pay into and you get your money back. It comes right out of the bank's bottom line when this happens, and makes it more expensive potentially for everybody, because it is not a bottomless pit of money that banks can go to reimburse themselves. And as the consumer, you get your money back. But if this happens enough, it's going to start reaching all consumers from a banking perspective, because we can't keep continuing to afford these losses, which is why some of you might be experiencing. Yeah.
The big banks can throw money at the problem. Listen, I've dealt with it. When it happens at Citibank, they don't care. They just throw money at the problem. But what has to happen when the small to medium-sized bank does something, or gets taken in a business email compromise and loses $75,000? Because let's go over here and let's go through some other scenarios on how I've seen situations where, and this is what I tell consumers. This is what, so all of a sudden, let's jump to another story here. We have an organization, they're buying, it's $1 billion company. Small companies buy small widgets. What do big companies buy? Big widgets. They buy
big widgets.
$3.5 million widget. It comes in on email. The request comes in. Everybody knows about it. The accounts payable person gets that email. She's about to process it. And then all of a sudden she gets another email about 15 minutes later, and it says, hey, Barbara, I just want to let you know we made a mistake on the invoice. We overcharged you. We didn't take the 3% cash discount. What's 3% of 3.5 million? It's enough for you to go, okay, they rip up the old invoice, they pay the new invoice. However, there is, separation of duties. So the young lady can't just write the check for 3.4 million. It has to go to internal audit. Internal audit gets it, they do everything. It gets signed out by the CFO. The CFO goes over, gives it to the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department does the wire transfer request in the amount of 3.4 million. The bank gets it. Bank does a good job. Bank picks up the phone and calls the company and says, are you sure you want to do this? So what do you think the company says?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. At that point,
Sure.
they pay the vendor. Okay. Week goes by. Vendor calls up and says, hey, you never paid the bill. Yes, we did. No, we didn't. They go back to the bank, and the bank says to them, hey, we'll figure this out. And the bank comes over and says, look, we wire transferred the money to the coordinates that you told us to in Bahrain. Well, the vendor's in Boston. But this company does international wire transfers. Before, they call me up over here. They say to me, hey, can you help us out? It's 11 days after the fact. I contact the FBI office in Bahrain. They contact local law enforcement. They contact the bank, and the bank says, hey, there's still $600,000 in the account. I'm about to do a happy dance. There's some money coming back, but it's hard for me to pick up the phone, call a company and say, hey, I got good news for you. You didn't lose 3.4 million today. You only lost 2.6. Never works out fine. So
No.
the money is gone. I get called into this. I'm here with the banks. I'm here with the CIO. And I asked them one simple question. What's your policy when when a customer changes bank account and routing information? They didn't have a policy. And you know what? There was only one thing the bank could do to make this situation better. What do you think this company wanted from the bank?
A phone call?
They wanted the money back, right?
Well, after the fact, yeah, absolutely. Give me
No,
my.
they wanted the money back.
Yep.
And now, was it the bank's fault? No, not at all. Do you think the customer cared? Customer left the branch. What happens to your organization when you lose a customer on that type of transaction and they take their $100 million and they move to another account? So these are the conversations where I put the burden back on the banks to educate the customers. And the banks go like this to me, that's not our responsibility. And I go like this, okay, no, I don't care. Doesn't matter to me, but how do you differentiate yourself as a bank unless you're going to provide value to your customers? And that's where I get called in to provide value to the banks to be able to do these types of talks, because are you doing a good job as a bank of educating your customers about these types of frauds? Are you educating them that they should be changing their policies? And a lot of the banks go like this. It's not our role. And I go, okay, that's why businesses fail, because they're not providing value add. You agree or disagree?
I totally agree. We've got one bank that we work with, and they have developed a value-added service for their small businesses, and they'll even do it for non-customers, because once you go through the process, if you're not going to be a customer of theirs, you're crazy. But they call it the fraud squad. And they've got cross-representation within the bank from their operations, from their CEO, from their technology and audit team. And they'll come into an organization and they'll look at what a small business has in place to help monitor and prevent things like wire fraud, internal theft, checks and controls, If it's a restaurant, what's your cash handling procedures and protocols to make sure that you don't have internal pilfering and theft going on. And they'll come through without a cost and bring the fraud squad into a business to help that business better understand their potential risk. And it's been very successful for them. And it's exactly like you said, it's about adding value. What do we do that adds more than just a great rate or low fees and answering the phone with a human? I mean, those are kind of table stakes in today's day and age. So it's good to hear you say that.
That's the challenge. I mean, we're dealing with issues on insurance. We're dealing with this. And that's why now I'm thinking about writing another book called The Truth to Cybersecurity. Why do we keep spending more money to fix the problem, and the problem gets worse if almost 90% of what I dealt with could have been prevented? And people are in such a fog because as I sit here and I deal with all of my banking clients and friends, they're getting bombed every day, not by cyber criminals, by vendors. Hey, you need a risk assessment. Hey, you need a PCI assessment. Hey, you need insurance. Hey, you need a firewall. You need this and that. And one of the things, if it's okay, I mean, I would never want to take over your webinar, but I will. I want to ask the folks out there, what do you want to know from me? I mean, I can go on for days. I can do a telethon about this, but I'd like to really.
I think Sean wants more TikTok outtakes. I think he wants us to do more stupid stuff like we did before. Yeah, we got that beat. I could always send Scott a ping pong paddle. That makes for some good. If we only had TikTok back then, that would have been brilliant.
Yes, or me sitting at the table at the restaurant where the chair fell.
So we have Scott, who's about this tall, and one of my colleagues from Mexico, who's about this tall, walking down the street, and yeah, that was a pretty good sight too. So yeah, so I didn't say at the beginning, obviously, those of you that are attending live, we certainly appreciate you joining the show and being part of our webinar today, outtakes and all. But if you have a question or something related to cybersecurity or online threats, by all means, go ahead and use the chat function and let us know. I'll keep an eye on those. But one of the questions that I've got for you is, with more people, like I said at the beginning, hunkering down, staying at home, what are some of just the novice mistakes that you're seeing or reading about, or maybe you've still got friends at the FBI? What are some of the novice mistakes that I suspect we're starting to see as a completely different segment of the population starts to get comfortable with the digitization of their life?
It's the oversimplification. These are not sophisticated threats. So when I have to boil things down, I go through almost 9 points or so, which is realize email is the #1 attack vector. You're going to get an email from somebody you know and somebody you trust. You're going to get an email. If you're a small business, you're going to get an email that's going to come from a bank. It's going to look like it's a bank because banks control the loans. They're going to tell you that, hey, go apply, provide us all your information. How many businesses are on their last leg right now hoping for something to go through so they could get a lot? What happens right now if you get an email saying that, hey, just want to let you know, it looks like it's coming from the Treasury Department, that the new PPP loans are coming through, but, or the economic stimulus is coming through. Another one could be just to say that, hey, it's your local Department of Health is telling you that there was an increase this morning on COVID deaths in your town. Stop, think before you click. Also think before you act. Also realize that we need separate passwords for our mission critical platforms. There's just a couple of things that I outlined. And hold on 1 second. I just want to get a prop, Eric. This is what I want to.
Uh-oh, he's getting a prop.
You know, and this is what I wrote in my book, The Secret to Cybersecurity. And whoever comes up with the first question, you know, I'm going to give you a copy of the book. And if we may, I hate that I have to bribe your audience because I'm just looking for, you know, I honestly get tired of talking to you. I think Sean would probably be a little more interesting to that. But this is what we're talking about. Think before we click. Think before we act. Make sure that we have separate passwords for our mission critical platforms. We also need to make sure, and what are mission critical? Think about all these different platforms that we keep information in. What happens if the bad guys are able to get access to your username and password? What do? They're able to log in. And when they log in, they're able to take over everything. Think about this. If you happen to have a Ring doorbell, what happens if I get your username and password for your Ring doorbell? What can I do? I can see everything.
Well, yeah, you can see everything that's going on in your front door. And if you get into that, you might have other Ring services inside the house, which would then give you access to the interior of the home. So you've got internal monitoring as well as external monitoring. And that could be very well connected to security services.
And what if
law
I get
enforcement.
access to your QuickBooks? What can I do?
Well, you've got access to all the financial data, so you could reverse engineer some sort of a threat. You can see exactly where the bank accounts are located. You've got access to financial data for verification purposes if somebody asks for specific information about the business.
What happens on your social media accounts? Think back to the Super Bowl. What happened on the NFL Twitter account hacks? They got in, they were able to go over, and let's say right now they're able to get into your Facebook feed or your company's Twitter feed and be able to send out some really nasty message about anything. And now that becomes, and it impacts your personal brand. So you have to identify, what do you have access to? Think about your Salesforce accounts. Think about your HR platforms. There's so many simple things right now that companies can do to secure that information.
Yep. Well, when, and not that I want to end on a downer, but when I do my social media training in my bank schools and my seminars, one of the last things I talk about is multi-factor or two-factor or two-step login authentication. And I will tell you that all of the social media platforms have that as an available option. And while some of the ones that I've seen haven't necessarily resulted in financial loss, they've certainly resulted in reputational damage, because somebody gets into your LinkedIn profile and they grab your account and they start sharing other information that is either multi-level marketing or inappropriate. I had a friend of mine who received a connection request from one of his former college buddies. And when he connected with him on LinkedIn, he got through, looked at his profile, and under his professional credentials, one of his skills was cheating on his wife. Yeah. And not that you put multi-factor authentication to keep a disgruntled spouse out of your account, which I know I will never personally experience because my wife and I are, you know, not going down that road. But he had his wife go in who felt she was wronged, and she was very subtle, but it was one of those, he's like, I haven't been logged into my account. She got in, took over, and was doing God knows how much damage. And he was CFO for a publicly traded company, a Fortune 500 company, with that out on his platform. He had no clue that somebody else had gotten into his account and started putting stuff like that out there. So it crazy. Was absolutely, yeah.
Sean asked a question about, you know, password software, and there are a couple of really good platforms that are out there, such as LastPass or Dashlane, but you need to use something called two-factor authentication on that, Sean, because if I steal your username and password for your software, I get the keys to the castle. So two-factor authentication, and these are a couple of takeaways that your audience needs to know. You need to make sure that you set up two-factor authentication on your email accounts, on your financial accounts, just all these different types of accounts. Because if the bad guys steal username and password, it is really not a good situation that they are able to log into your accounts.
Yeah.
And think about how much do we have on Microsoft Outlook, Eric? I mean, think about storing in your OneDrive.
Yep. The thing that I'll oftentimes hear from people is, well, I use a complex password, and they think that that's sufficient without having complex and unique to each platform and two-factor. So what I give them as a scenario is, let's say you're using the same password for all of your accounts to keep it simple, and it's complicated with letters and numbers and symbols and special characters and all sorts of other stuff. But technology doesn't necessarily need to worry about that, because if Dropbox gets hacked and your special character password is in Dropbox with your email address, some automated bot system is going to take that username and password combo, regardless of how complex it is, and it's going to run it against Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and OneDrive and Outlook and every place else, and they'll get right in, and it's not going to make a difference because you've given them that information, and game over.
And here's a great scenario that will really simplify it and explain it. Yahoo gets hacked into 2015. Russian organized crime steals 3 billion usernames and passwords. But Yahoo says it's no big deal. All they stole was your username and password. What did Yahoo tell us all to do? Do you remember, Eric?
Go out and change your password on Yahoo.
That's right. So let's just assume for this example, every single person changes their Yahoo username and password. And you know that's not the case. But for this example, all 3 billion people do that. Out of those 3 billion, so now organized crime has all this information. They don't even know what to do with it. There's so much of it. So out of those 3 billion Yahoo users, what percentage do you think have either an iPhone, an iPad, or a Mac computer? Take a guess. Just give me a number.
I would say probably 95%.
Let's go on the opposite side of the spectrum. Let's say it's 5%, because you know it's a lot more than 5. Okay,
right.
Let's use 5% for this example. What is 5% of 3 billion? Besides a lot. 150.
A lot.
150.
150.
And out of those 150 million users, I guarantee you 99.9% go like this. I got a Mac. Macs don't get viruses, right? Well, I got good news. Nobody's really writing viruses for Macs. Do you believe me?
No.
I used to say, trust me, I'm with the FBI. I can't get away with that anymore for obvious reasons.
Trust me, I used to be with the FBI, right?
Yeah. But here's the deal. A recent study said that almost 50% of the population is using the same username and password for multiple platforms. So let's go even lower again. Let's say it's 5% of the 5%. What's 5% of 150,000? 7,500. So let's just assume out of that thing on the lowest side, there's 7,500 people are impacted because they had the same username and password for the Yahoo account as they did for their email account, as they did for their bank account information. And now all of a sudden bad guys are able to go through these. And I've had situations where the bad guys were able to get in through that example, get into the email account, and then see where they were banking, and you see the credit cards, and empty out the business bank accounts. All the personal accounts were fine, but the business bank accounts, because in the bank said, which they were right, they should have protected the password. And that's why I tell my family and friends, and I mention it in my book, I don't do business with banks that don't have two-factor authentication. And that's a hard thing for banks, because if you make people do it, they're not going to use it. And if you don't do it, you're going to get screwed.
Well, and that's the follow-up question from Sean. He says two-factor authentication can be a pain in the butt. So how is the industry evolving? How is the security and identification getting better at recognizing patterns? Or, on my phone, I use LastPass. I've got that enabled with fingerprint identification and some autofill capabilities. But I have been in situations where I've been unable to get to my phone. I don't remember what a password is. I can't get in, and I've actually locked myself out of platforms until I could get into my device to get access to my master account. So
me too.
It is a pain. Yeah.
But let me tell you, a lot of my FBI buddies today are working in intrusion response companies. And let me tell you, they're killing it during COVID-19. They are absolutely killing it. So Sean, I want to tell you that two-factor authentication is a pain in the ass. There's no way around it. And I meet with clients all the time and they go, we don't want to do it. And I go, okay, sounds good to me. And then I tell them, hey, here, let me give you the telephone number to my buddy Matt. He works for Kroll. They're one of the big intrusion response companies. Because when you have a problem, and almost 90% of the problems that I dealt with could have been prevented with two-factor authentication, call my buddy Matt 24/7, 7 days a week, but mention my name so he can take 10% off your 5, 6, or 7-figure retainer, and then they kick me back 25%. And I go, I can't say kickback. I'm former FBI. We don't do kickbacks. We call them referral fees. Okay. So let me tell you, 85% of the intrusion response work going on today is account compromise, which could be prevented. So that, Sean, the easier we make it for ourselves, the easier we make it for the bad guys. In the old days, we didn't have to worry about it. 2012, this was in its infancy, but now we're not talking sophisticated hacks. We're talking crimeware as a service on the dark web, where anyone can purchase this stuff like phishing email kits to steal usernames and passwords. So those who have their passwords secure are going to survive.
Absolutely. He gave you a big thank you.
Okay.
We'll keep that off the permanent record, but yeah, so very cool. No, and what are your thoughts about, because I've seen a couple of platforms like Microsoft, for example. I've gotten secure files delivered to me through banks, and they use a one-time expiring password where you get an email with a link, you click the link, that generates a one-time password back to the email that originally showed up, and then you plug that number into a website, and then that gets you in. And it's Microsoft. So in my mind, and in probably many consumers' minds, Microsoft's got it figured out. I don't have to have a password, but I'm getting access to sensitive data. Are you seeing any other efforts to try to make this easier?
An impersonation of those types of emails, and that's why we have to educate our customers. What if all of a sudden I get an email that looks like it's coming from my bank with one of these types of things? Now I have a personal relationship with my banker, and and I tell my banker, under no circumstances will you, if I send you an email saying that I'm about to get killed, unless you wire transfer money. Let me get killed. I hate to say it. We have to have those relationships, and that's where the small banks can win. The small banks could win by having those personal relationships with their customers and educating them and talking to them about all these different types of scenarios. Because the bad guys are getting in, and all of a sudden I might get an email from my bank, and unless I know it's coming, I'm going to pick up the phone. I call my banker. I go, did you mean to send this to me? Is this something that I need to do? If not, I'm okay. But I'm a small business. I don't have 150 transactions going through every day.
Right.
And the real estate sector is getting killed by this. And I wrote a whole chapter in my book about real estate fraud, because the real estate sector is getting destroyed.
How so? What's different on the real estate side? You would think, being physical property, and it's not like digital currency that you can send over the wire like a
Oh,
Bitcoin or some
all
sort of a
right.
transfer.
Okay. So we're going to go like this. Eric, you just found that piece of property in the middle of nowhere that you love. Okay, where you can run around and do what you like to do, which is sunbathe on your deck and rob. Never mind. So you go over, you buy this piece of property, and let's say the piece of property is $200,000. You found that it's great. You're having communications with your broker. You talk to her in person. You have a great relationship with your broker, and your broker says to you, "Hey, Eric, in a couple of days, I'm going to send you the instructions on where to wire transfer your money." Think about the last time you purchased a house. Okay, so all of a sudden, Monday comes and you get an email from your broker with the HUD-1 form and instructions on how to wire transfer the $20,000 to the Chase bank account. What do you think about this? 10 years ago, what did you do when you got an email from your broker with that information? What'd you do?
Followed it.
Yeah, so you follow it, you send the wire transfer over.
Yep.
Okay, you go over, you do it, you make it to Chase. All of a sudden, 4 days later, your broker calls you up and says, "Hey, Eric, how come you didn't send the money?" What do you mean? I got this email from you, and let's say the broker is Alice1935@gmail. But under further inspection, you look and the email came from Alice1935@mail.com. Now, let me tell you, you're out the money because I've traced these things and the money goes, because the money was
Yep.
supposed to go to Wells Fargo. The money goes to the Chase account. Now, the broker didn't send you the email. The title company didn't send you the email. The cyber criminal sent you an email and you sent the money to the wrong account. So think about this from a banking point of view. You call your bank up and say, "Hey, recall the wire." Okay, it's 5 days later, the person took the money out. Does your bank have an obligation to give you back that money?
No.
No, of course not. Okay, who over here, Eric, right now gets stuck holding the bag on this?
So chances are the bank's going to kowtow to it and do what it needs to do to try to preserve the relationship.
Not at
I don't
all.
know.
No, the bank did nothing wrong. The bank did nothing wrong. Now let's move it up. It's a $250,000 thing because of a phishing email. I don't recommend the banks do that. Well, what about the real estate broker? Can we go after the real estate broker? She didn't have two-factor authentication on her account. Maybe they got into her account. Maybe it was the mortgage company. Maybe it was the title company.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you is where do you go to find out the point of entry? Could it have been somebody got into my email and just sat there and watched and saw that I was emailing back and forth?
All right, so here's what we'll do. We're going to say we hire a forensics company to do the investigation. Okay? I don't know who you're going to hire it because you're wealthy fan. You want to see what happened. So now you're going to go out and be able to determine that the real estate broker's email was compromised. Okay? That her email was compromised. They stole that information, and now, because of her mistake, you suffered a loss. So what are you going to do?
I'm going to go after the real estate agency.
Okay. What are most real estate agents? Independent contractors who are stay-at-home moms. Okay.
Yep.
What's the first rule? Do we sue rich people or poor people? How much money are you going to spend on that? I've seen millions and millions of dollars worth of losses. And this is where I do work with the real estate sector. And I'm not a consultant, I'm a trainer. I go out here, and you want to know what the difference is between a trainer and a consultant? We're more expensive. We don't give you a written deliverable. Okay. We do our training, and then I offer something that no other consultant can do. When I'm done, I leave and I never call you again. Honestly, because what I try to do is empower individuals to be able to take these steps to keep themselves safe. Because you're going to miss it under the risk assessments, you're going to miss it under the penetration test. Well, everything we talked about today, we're not talking about technical problems. We're talking about social engineering.
Yep. Well, that's one of in a lot of the different sessions that I've sat in on and a lot of the different companies that I've heard speak, a lot of it goes back to technology and tools and a lot of the stuff that you mentioned. But at the end of the day, it's crazy how much common sense plays into this. But unfortunately, common's not real common.
And I had the opportunity. I was just being interviewed for a television show, and I was having fun because I was like, look, I'm not a subject matter expert. I haven't put anybody in jail. I've never saved a day. And I'm like, all I've done is learn from 1,000 different situations. I've taken the commonalities out of them all.
Right.
And I put them into a very, very simple format to be able to do it. One of the last questions I want to kind of throw out there is insurance. I mean, that's the biggest question. And I tell people, if you're not using two-factor authentication on your banking, on your email, on your social media at work, and on your cloud accounts, and your company, insurance companies provided you with a policy, call them up, get a 30-year policy. They have no idea what they're doing. I wonder why I never get asked to speak at insurance conferences, Eric. Do you think it's something?
Might have something to do with that. I don't know. Yeah. Well, in the last few minutes that we've got, and as I suspected, the hour blew by, what are some closing thoughts or tips or suggestions for folks that either are with us live or maybe catch this on the replay?
Okay. I'm going to lay them out. I think there's 8 real good points. I think there's a couple
of
good points that I've kind of created. I think I even wrote them down one day. And you know me.
Number one.
You know me. I never like to write anything down. But here's what it comes down to. Think before you click. Become a human firewall. Realize email is the #1 attack vector. You're going to get an email from somebody you know and somebody you trust. It's not going to be Boris Badnoff from cybercriminal.org. And the next one is text. If you get a text message that looks like it's coming from a bank, question it. The next thing, number 2, think before you act. If you get an email from somebody and it asks you to change your bank account and routing information, or it asks you for sensitive information, pick up the phone and call. Okay, especially with real estate transactions, confirm wire transfers. For my bank friends here, do not take anything over email or text. It requires a phone call. The next thing is we need to make sure we identify our mission critical cloud-based accounts. What are these accounts that we have that can destroy our life? Email, social media, Internet of Things like your Ring doorbell, your iPhone, your banking platforms. We all have about 15 to 20 separate mission critical passwords. Do these at home. Next is we need to make sure that we have separate, robust passwords. Think about passphrases or a password manager. Then realize that no matter how good of a password you have, what happens if the bad guy steals your password? You're out of luck. So you have to be able to have the two-factor authentication to do that. Also, make sure we're backing up our information. What is your mission critical data? And have an offsite backup. So if you get ransomware on your network, which we haven't talked about, your life will not be destroyed. And also realize that no matter what you do, the bad guys can get your information through a third party. So freeze your credit. There's a great resource out there called Frozen, FROZENPII.com, and it's a former federal prosecutor who talks about this and shows you how to set up your passwords And also my book, The Secret to Cybersecurity, a simple plan to protect your family and business, to be able to help you. And let me ask you, everything that I just shared with you, that would if I could go back in time and I could give those points to my victims, they probably wouldn't have been victims. And how much money do you go out and spend today? Because honestly, you don't even need to get my book. Just take those points, research it. How much money does anyone need to spend today to keep themselves safe? That's about how many points the same amount of points I scored when we played ping pong.
I wasn't thinking that at all.
Well, it was a pleasure to be able to do that. Sean, hit me up on LinkedIn and I'll send you a copy of my book. Let's see if you can do that.
Excellent. I know he can, because he's one of my star students and he's turning into a LinkedIn wizard. So
I hope he's not in Canada.
I'm building you up there. Hope he's not what?
In Canada.
No, he is not. He
Good.
is not.
It's too expensive to ship there.
Oh, you poor thing. So anyway, Scott, thanks for being part of the show today. I know we've got some other LinkedIn stuff that we need to catch up on as well. Looking forward to that. But as expected, you rocked it and gave away some great info. All about providing value, right?
All right.
It's all about.
I'll get with you for ping pong later.
All right. Talk to you later. Thanks for joining me today on the show, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you next week and on future weeks here at freewebinarwednesdays.com. We'll get the recording compiled and out there so you can share the fun with all of your friends and colleagues. Those of you in the United States, enjoy a safe and happy, hopefully warm Independence Day, 4th of July. Yep, Memorial's already happened. And we'll see you next week, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, take care.